The chamber of the Galactic Council was vast enough to swallow entire stadiums, a cathedral of authority where the voices of hundreds of civilizations converged into policy, treaties, and judgment. Marble that wasn't marble and steel that wasn't steel arched overhead, materials harvested from worlds so distant that no human eye had seen them before Earth was invited into this council. Light shimmered from embedded crystals, refracting like frozen starlight, bathing the delegates in an eternal glow of solemnity. Every seat was occupied by species whose names could not be pronounced by human tongues without effort, beings older than the pyramids, older than fire itself. To them, humanity was the upstart, a species that had crawled into the stars barely a generation ago. Their arrival had been tolerated, not celebrated. Their chair at the long oval table was not earned by respect, but grudgingly provided because humanity had survived wars that should have annihilated them, and in surviving, had drawn attention impossible to ignore. When the human delegate entered, a man in uniform that bore no flamboyant tassels, no glittering jewels, no ceremonial armor, the silence was edged with disdain. He was not a politician by training but a warrior by blood, a Navy SEAL chosen not for his words but for his presence. Straight-backed, jaw set, eyes forward, he carried into that chamber the weight of every soldier buried beneath unmarked soil, every mother who had clutched a folded flag, every child who had grown without a father. There was no pomp in his arrival, no attendants flanking him, just a steady stride and the quiet thunder of dignity. The alien stairs were almost physical in their pressure. Amphibians with gills flaring, avians with feathers shifting in discomfort, silicon-bodied creatures humming through their cores, each radiated the same thought: what was this fragile primate doing among us? He was shorter than many, less armored than most, and the air of quiet confidence only irritated those who measured worth in fang length or claw span. Humanity, to them, had leapt ahead of its station. They spoke among themselves, whispers layered in dozens of frequencies, assuming the man could not hear. He did. He ignored them. Discipline demanded it. Across the chamber stood a figure bred for conquest, a soldier of a species whose name translated only loosely to Scarad. They were warborn, their bodies sculpted by generations of selective violence, taller than the human by several feet, bone ridges crowning their skulls like helmets of nature's design. Their skin was scaled, mottled with colors that shifted depending on mood, and those scales darkened now with the oily hue of mockery. To the Scarad, humanity's inclusion was insult enough. To see one of their kind stand equal at the table was intolerable. He chuckled in low guttural tones that echoed off the crystalline walls, ensuring every delegate heard. The council chair, an entity of near-translucent elegance, attempted to begin the session. Discussions were meant to address trade disputes, migration routes, piracy at the galaxy's edge. But order was fragile when contempt had already taken root. The Scarad soldier leaned forward, resting clawed hands on the polished table, speaking words laced with venom about humanity's weakness. He recited Earth's wars not as proof of resilience but as evidence of instability, calling humans reckless fire starters, children wielding weapons they barely understood. He spoke of Earth's fragile champions, mocking the audacity of sending soldiers as delegates. Each insult landed like a stone dropped into water, ripples spreading among the alien assembly. Some laughed quietly, others smirked, and a few shifted uneasily, uncertain of where this provocation might lead. The SEAL did not move. His breathing was steady, heart rate calm, his gaze fixed forward. He knew posturing when he saw it. He had stared down warlords who tried the same game. Silence was his answer, because silence could be sharper than retorts. Yet silence also emboldened arrogance. The Scarad took his lack of reaction as weakness, and weakness was intolerable to them. He rose to his full towering height, shoulders broad, ridges catching the light like blades, his posture dripping with intent. The murmurs in the chamber grew, not out of concern for the human but in expectation of theater. The council chamber, for all its grandeur, was no stranger to displays of intimidation. But rarely had the target been a species still so new to the stars. The chair raised a voice of caution, urging restraint, but it was drowned beneath the rumble of the Scarad's laughter. The alien soldier circled the table, step by heavy step, approaching the human with deliberate slowness, savoring the attention. Delegates leaned forward, some curious, others eager to witness the humiliation of the newcomer. The seal turned his head slightly, eyes following but body unmoving, still as a statue carved from iron. Every fiber of his training told him to remain composed. Every whisper in the chamber urged the alien forward. Every second that passed drew the moment tighter, like a bowstring pulled to breaking. The stage was set, the air dense with anticipation, and all understood one truth even before it unfolded. In this place of supposed civility, the seeds of something irreversible had just been sown. The scarred soldier loomed over the human, his ridged face contorted in a sneer that revealed teeth sharpened by both biology and ritual. Every step closer was an act of open contempt, every movement meant to remind all present who was predator and who was prey. The chamber, normally an arena of restrained speech, became heavy with anticipation. Conversations halted, the hum of translated speech fell silent, and all attention locked upon the unfolding confrontation. The council chair called again for restraint, but even authority was powerless in that moment. Tradition demanded respect, and respect to the scarred was taken, not granted. The soldier's voice carried without amplification, guttural tones resonating like drums of war. He mocked humanity's wars, reducing centuries of sacrifice to failures strung together. He derided Earth's victories as accidents, survival as luck rather than determination. He told the council that humans were children who had wandered into a hall meant for giants. Laughter rippled in uneven waves across species who had themselves once suffered under the scarid's dominance, but now found relief in seeing another bear their scorn. Their mirth was not born of loyalty to the aggressor but of a desperate instinct to stay clear of his ire. To laugh was to avoid being noticed. To laugh was to prove you were not the target. The human stood still, gaze steady, face unreadable. His training held him in perfect control. He had endured worse insults in barracks and battlefield briefings. He had faced the cruelty of enemies who didn't use words but torture. A slap of sound could not penetrate the armor of discipline forged over years of combat. Yet silence is a blade that cuts both ways. What he meant as composure, the scarred read as weakness. The alien's darkened scales shifted into an even deeper hue, signaling aggression. With a sudden burst of movement, clawed fingers lashed outward, and the back of his massive hand collided with the human's face. The sound was sharp, louder than expected, echoing off crystalline walls like the crack of a gunshot. The force rocked the human's head to one side, a burst of heat stinging his cheek, but his footing did not break. He did not stumble, he did not flinch beyond the involuntary turn of his jaw. He stood as though the blow had been nothing more than wind. The chamber gasped in collective shock, a sound deeper than any shout, a gasp born of disbelief that such audacity had been carried out in front of the council. Protocols shattered like glass. Violence within these walls was a sacrilege. Yet the deed was done. The soldier withdrew his hands slowly, savoring the moment, shoulders squared, eyes glinting with triumph. He turned slightly, scanning the chamber, basking in the laughter that rose once more, harsher now, emboldened by the act. For them, it was humiliation delivered in its purest form, not words, not threats, but the sting of hand against flesh. The human had been struck in front of the galaxy, and to many, that should have been the end of the matter. A warning delivered. A lesson taught. But the man in uniform remained unmoved. The red mark across his cheek stood as testament, yet he gave no words of surrender, no gesture of shame, no outward sign of defeat. He stood taller, straighter, his composure only hardening in the wake of the assault. His eyes locked with the soldiers, not defiant in arrogance but steady with the cold weight of someone who had already measured the cost and knew it would be paid in full. The chamber, moments before alive with cruel laughter, began to fall silent once again. 2 seconds passed. In those seconds, the air grew heavier, and every delegate felt it. They could not name it, but instinct screamed the truth. Something irreversible had just shifted. The Scarab had sought to display dominance, to remind the galaxy of his kind's power. Instead, he had ignited a spark in the one place least forgiving of arrogance. The silence was no longer amusement but anticipation of a storm. The human stillness was not weakness. It was calculation, discipline compressed into a pause so thin it could slice through steel. The alien soldier had mistaken quiet for submission. He had mistaken composure for fear. He had mistaken humanity's patience for acceptance. And in those 2 seconds that followed the slap, the galaxy itself began to realize it was watching not humiliation, but the prelude to reckoning. 2 seconds stretched into an eternity, each fraction of a heartbeat carrying the weight of centuries. The chamber held its breath, every delegate suspended between disbelief and morbid curiosity. The Scarab stood tall, reveling in his performance, convinced the human's silence meant surrender. Yet the stillness that radiated from the man in uniform was not submission. It was the pause of a predator assessing distance, angles, and certainty before unleashing decisive violence. Inside that pause, thought moved faster than sound. Muscles memorized from years of training aligned in readiness. His stance, seemingly unchanged, shifted by degrees so small the untrained eye could not notice, but every adjustment brought him closer to balance and lethal precision. Shoulders square not in defiance but in preparation, jaw clenched to anchor focus, lungs filled with air in a measured rhythm that brought clarity rather than anger. The mark on his cheek still burned, but the fire inside had never been sparked by pain. It was sparked by insult carried against his people, against the generations who had bled to prove humanity's worth. In those seconds he remembered the ocean nights of cold training, the grueling drills that broke lesser men, the comrades carried from deserts, jungles, and mountains where survival was earned by skill, not luck. He remembered enemies larger, stronger, faster who still fell because human determination did not break. Those memories were not nostalgia, they were calibration. Every breath reinforced the singular truth: violence was never his first choice, but when forced, it became an inevitability executed with unflinching finality. The alien soldier smirked, scales shifting into a shade that radiated confidence. He mistook stillness for paralysis, quiet for fear. He had never faced humanity on equal footing, never understood that silence from a warrior was not hesitation but the gathering of inevitability. His kind were raised on shows of dominance, bred to equate loudness with strength, but the human before him had been molded by wars where silence was survival, where hesitation meant death, where action had to be perfect because one mistake ended lives. Whispers threaded through the chamber. Some species tilted in their seats, unsure whether to expect the human to collapse under shame or retaliate. A few began to sense what the soldier could not, the dangerous quiet that preluded an eruption. The seal's eyes did not flinch, did not blink, did not shift from the alien's face. They carried no hatred, no fear, only the still, cold clarity of someone who had already made the decision. Time did not slow in truth, but perception twisted as focus narrowed. The chamber with all its glittering walls and delegates ceased to exist in the man's awareness. There was only the soldier before him, only the arc of movement that had delivered the insult, only the line of tension in his opponent's posture that spoke of arrogance. He measured weight, distance, reach, strength. He knew with certainty where to strike, how hard, and what would follow. There was no guesswork. Training had eliminated uncertainty long ago. Those 2 seconds became the purest embodiment of human resilience. Every war, every scar, every victory and loss condensed into silence that spoke louder than words. Delegates began to shift uneasily, not knowing why they felt it, but knowing instinctively that danger filled the chamber. Even those who had mocked humanity moments earlier now leaned back, as if distance might shield them from the consequence about to unfold. The alien soldier basked in imagined triumph, too blind to recognize he had already sealed his fate. His laughter, low and guttural, rumbled across the room as if he alone were victor. Yet his fate was no longer in his own hands. The pause ended, though to most it was imperceptible. The decision was already made, the outcome already certain, and the galaxy itself leaned forward to witness what came when silence gave way to inevitability. The pause ended with precision that belonged not to impulse but to discipline sharpened over years. The human's body moved in a way invisible to those who did not understand violence, but unmistakable to those who had lived by it. In a single motion, calculated with flawless economy, the seal struck. There was no wasted flourish, no unnecessary gesture. His hand rose and fell with the speed of inevitability, guided by anatomy, physics, and certainty. The strike was not wild rage but controlled force, honed to break bone as cleanly as glass under pressure. The sound shattered the silence, a crack that echoed louder than any word could have carried. The scarab's skull yielded, ridges splintering, eyes widening in disbelief as the truth struck deeper than the blow itself. He had not been facing prey. He had been facing a predator disciplined enough to wait until the moment was absolute. The massive soldier collapsed, body robbed of its arrogance, falling in a heap that left the chamber in a state of frozen awe. No one moved. The Council, a gathering of civilizations that had seen wars across galaxies, stared in stunned quiet. They had expected defiance, perhaps protest, but not this. Not a strike so final, so absolute, that it left no room for doubt. The scarab, whose kind prided themselves as conquerors, lay broken on the floor, and the man who delivered it did not gloat, did not boast, did not even adjust his posture beyond resuming stillness. He stood calm, breathing steady, hands by his side as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Shock rippled through the delegates. Some recoiled, scales or feathers shifting in instinctive alarm. Others leaned forward, compelled by the realization that something monumental had unfolded. The scarab's fellow soldiers stirred, claws flexing, rage simmering, yet none advanced. They had seen the speed, the precision, the unflinching calm. To act rashly now was to risk the same fate, and though their pride demanded vengeance, instinct reminded them of mortality. The council chair spoke no words, for none were sufficient. Authority seemed hollow in the presence of such a display. This was not a breach of decorum. It was a revelation. Humanity's place among them could no longer be dismissed as the indulgence of younger species. What they had just witnessed rewrote every perception of fragility. The seal's eyes remained steady, unwavering. He did not scan the chamber for approval. He did not bow or smile. His silence spoke louder than any declaration. The strike had not been vengeance for personal insult but a reminder that humanity's patience was not submission, that dignity could not be struck from them without consequence. Every delegate felt the weight of that truth settle like iron across their thoughts. Fear bled into respect. The laughter that had filled the chamber minutes earlier was gone, replaced by whispers edged with caution. Those who had mocked now studied the human as if seeing the species for the first time. They remembered Earth's history, tales of wars that had seemed reckless, survival against odds that defied logic. They had dismissed it as chaos, but now they saw it as something else entirely. Discipline fused with ferocity, restraint held until release became unstoppable. The scarab's body lay still, the echo of his arrogance already fading. His death, or near death, was less important than the message his fall delivered. One man had shattered the illusion of superiority with a single, measured act. In that moment, the balance of perception shifted. Humanity was no longer a newcomer tolerated at the table but a force recognized, feared, and respected. The chamber remained quiet, yet the silence was no longer charged with mockery. It was reverence, the kind reserved for storms, earthquakes, or fire, natural forces that could not be ignored. The seal had given no speech, yet every species present understood the lesson carved into their memory. To strike a human was to invite the wrath of a people who did not strike often, but when they did, the result was decisive and final. The body on the floor was more than a corpse of arrogance. It was a symbol shattered in front of all who had believed humanity fragile. The council chamber remained hushed, a silence thick enough to choke, broken only by the slow rhythm of the human's breathing. He had not shifted since the strike. He had not spoken, nor did he need to. The silence was no longer void but filled with the weight of revelation. In those still moments, the galaxy understood something it had never wanted to admit. Humanity did not posture, humanity endured, and when pressed beyond endurance, humanity struck with a force that could not be ignored. Eyes that moments earlier had been filled with disdain now studied the man as though seeing him anew. Delegates from species who had laughed felt unease coil through them. Even those who had no loyalty to humanity realized what had unfolded was not merely a confrontation between two soldiers but a declaration written in flesh and bone. The Scarab had tested humanity, and failed in the most public way possible. That failure would ripple beyond the walls, carried by every report, every retelling, every trembling whisper that spread through the corridors of power. The human remained composed, body language still a fortress of discipline. He did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He allowed the evidence to speak for itself, the broken warrior at his feet more eloquent than any speech could have been. Delegates who had spent centuries relying on intimidation now recognized that restraint was not weakness. They realized that patience, held long enough, became a weapon sharper than any claw. Respect rooted itself where mockery had grown. The council chair finally found words, voice subdued, brittle against the weight of the moment. Order was requested, but it came not from law or authority. It came from the realization that one act had realigned the entire balance of perception. No one dared interrupt, no one dared challenge. Even the scared warriors who had twitched with fury moments earlier remained still, bound not by fear of punishment but by recognition of what humanity represented. The galaxy had just learned a truth they had ignored for too long. The human species was not to be measured by size, claws, or armor, but by the unyielding will that refused to bow. Whispers began, careful and quiet. Delegates leaned toward one another, voices threading caution, awe, and reluctant admiration. Alliances were recalculated in that instant. Those who had dismissed Earth as irrelevant now considered what partnership might mean. Those who had feared Scarab dominance now realized that fear had a counterbalance. Humanity had not only defended its dignity but altered the equation of galactic politics with a single decisive act. The seal stood as the embodiment of that lesson. He neither pressed advantage nor issued threats. His silence was more powerful than threats could ever be. He had shown that humanity would not be humiliated, that respect was not optional, and that patience should never be mistaken for weakness. His composure reinforced the message. They were not reckless beasts, not uncontrollable savages, but disciplined warriors who struck only when there was no other choice, and when they struck, they ended the matter beyond dispute. The Scarab who had fallen would be remembered, but not for his pride. He would be remembered as the warning carved into history. His arrogance had become the vessel for humanity's demonstration. His fall ensured that no other delegate, no other warrior, would ever again view humans with casual disdain. Fear had been replaced with recognition, and recognition would mature into respect that no decree or negotiation could have secured. As the chamber settled into uneasy quiet, one truth rang clear across every mind present. The galaxy had witnessed not a brawl, not an accident, but a statement. Humanity's place was no longer questioned. To underestimate them was to invite consequences that no empire could afford. The delegates would leave that chamber and carry the story to their worlds, and in every retelling, the image would remain, the strike, the fall, the silence that followed. 2 seconds had been enough. 2 seconds to transform ridicule into reverence. 2 seconds to carve a place for humanity among the stars that no one would ever challenge again. And when the human finally turned his gaze from the fallen soldier to the assembly, nothing needed to be said. The lesson had already been etched deep, never to be forgotten.